to the comments and presentations online as much as I could. And I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for what I think and hope you all are working on together these 3 days in Manila. And I'm going to dive right in because I know that you've all heard a lot and thought about and are experts in why nature brings such value in many different dimensions to people. And that what we're really working on together here in this session, these 3 days, is really thinking about the practical side of how do we implement, how do we take those tangible and intangible benefits from nature and have them inform and really drive policy change and investment change. And I know you all are experts in this and you've been talking about it and sharing your lessons and your challenges. So my overarching reflections are really that this will take a village and each of us has a role. So there are roles of visioning what the future could look like, providing knowledge and sectoral expertise, so traditional knowledge, remote sensing knowledge, formal analytical knowledge, but also cultural knowledge and much less traditional sources, expertise across sectors, and then we each have roles in assessing and then prioritizing actions. And then also, as many of the MDB leaders said on the first day, demonstrating. So we need to prove that this is working. And if it's not working, to adapt and learn from the monitoring that we will put in place and make changes. So acknowledge that this is a learning process. So these are many different roles, and each of you in the room and those of our colleagues back home are all pulling together to make this implementation work. And this project that we've been talking about and that we're all working together on, I think of as this theory that comes from business, and it's also very much from evolutionary theory. It's called the wisdom of the crowd. And Aristotle talked about this too in his theory of collective judgment. And he used the story of a potluck where individuals bringing dishes to a potluck can create a much more satisfying feast than if one person is cooking all of the meals for people. And the idea of the wisdom of the crowd is really the way we've designed with all of you in this room to have governments and multilateral financial institutions and technical expertise and communities try things out in the different countries around the Asia Pacific region, in Africa and in Latin America and the Caribbean. Let these innovations and creative experiments play out for a little bit. What does it look like to incorporate nature's benefits into decisions? And then that wisdom of the crowd is only harnessed after you let those 1,000 flowers bloom around the world, or in our case, 15 different countries we're trying right now. If you bring people together to collectively reflect and say, what's working? What am I really excited and inspired about? And where am I stuck? What are the big impediments? What are the barriers that I'm feeling? And really collectively come together and see, okay, this is the path forward after these experiments out in the different countries and regions have played out for a little bit. So it's that innovation and spark of ideas and trying new things in the countries with ADB and these other development institutions. And then this moment like you're in right now, coming together and sharing the learning so that we can keep improving and go out and innovate some more. So this wisdom of the crowd idea, as you all know, because you are representing governments you're representing development finance and some private finance, as well as local community members. And it really is trying to get these innovations and barriers identified, and then picking specific reforms that are needed in policy, in finance, and then really day-to-day nuts and bolts operations, processes, and then the capacity in these science policy processes to carry this work out. And we heard this in the first day of talks. I heard many of these ideas and needs expressed very clearly. So I know that we're all working on this together. And this theory, the wisdom of the crowd theory that we're all embarking on here, has been shown to be much more effective than if one person who's the expert in something undertakes a big visionary effort like this. And then my final reflection is just, as we all know, you know this in your own countries where you're working, in your own development institutions, in your research institutions, wherever you sit with your work, but also your home and your community, that change only happens when there's trust and inspiration. And I can hear it in the talks here, and I know from some great stories about your field trip yesterday, and I hope today we can bring this back together and just keep deepening this trust that we're developing and inspire each other so that we can work through the challenges and keep helping ourselves get to this higher goal that we have. So that's my wish for everybody for this last day. And thanks, Suzanne, for letting me chime in here a little bit, and I'll listen with interest to your remarks, Suzanne, and also further discussion. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mary. I think what Mary just said to us is a really good introduction for day 3, because what we're trying to do with this project is very new for an MDB to take a different approach. We are in an excellent knowledge partnership with Stanford University and also building in knowledge from World Bank and IADB. And we want to achieve something which is different from what we've done before. So it is part of a learning process in terms of how we as an MDB can do things differently to support our member countries. It's a partnership in that regard in terms of we are not here to tell you what to do, but we are here to listen to your needs in terms of how we can support you to bring this forward. So in that regard, the interaction that we have over 3 days and continuing with the project is very important because it's a collaboration, and the objective is to support you and your country in terms of a more sustainable and nature positive development pathway. So I know it's been probably a couple of tough days. Everyone has arrived on early flights. You had a long day in the field yesterday, but super happy that you have come back for day 3 and what is our last day. Today is a bit more focused in terms of our engagement with the 5 pilot countries and exploring a bit deeper into the activities that we want to do there and how we take that forward. But before we move on to the next session, because I am conscious that we need to be timely today, if anyone has any comments or insights that they would like to share over the first 2 days that we've had for the presentations on Tuesday, or insights from the field yesterday, you're most welcome to share your thoughts at this time. Anyone? No? Okay. One comment online. That's okay, because I think, yes? Oh, excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Chantu from Cambodia Resident Mission. I'm ADB staff. I think what I learned from yesterday is that there are a lot of works that we need to do together. For example, at the community lending site, there are a lot of sedimentations that will affect all the livelihood of the people in the future. And the cost for doing that it will be much expensive. And then also we have to think how we can make, like some of the people may think that if they, let's say, do conservations, they will achieve little when the rest of the people that do not think that they will get something from the land and these kind of things. And also from the lending side, like the cost that the government charge and the fee will be contributed to the maintenance and to operation of the community will somehow need to be considered to ensure that a proper O&Ms are in that place. So this is only my take. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share their thoughts at this time? No? Okay. Well, I think that's actually a good segue then. We can move into the first session of the day, in which case I can invite the panelists who will be joining me today, Chin Phong, Yoko, Christine, and Pavitt, if you are here, please come on up. And while they get settled, I think some of the key highlights that the moderators shared with us from the last session are quite interesting in terms of setting the scene for this session that we're going to have. And, starting with what Chantel said yesterday about, on Tuesday, in terms of the involving consciousness, our awareness and ability around wanting to work on the nature agenda is increasing, yet we still see many struggles ahead of us in terms of how we practically take that forward. And I think that's one of the key objectives of this project that we have, and the collaboration is how we can proceed with this agenda and make it practical and usable for countries. While we have good examples, we have good pilots, and we have good processes, it's the enabling process, or how we put that together in a package so that you can use it in your country, and it's not a burden, it's not difficult, it actually becomes a viable tool for you to use for informed decisions and investment decision making. So in that regard, we can start off with the session that we have this morning, and that will be session 10 in terms of natural capital investments, long-term impact on food security, climate change, and livelihoods. For this panel, what we want to look at is kind of that long-term mainstreaming approach of how we move forward with this agenda. So joining me on the panel this morning, we have Chin Phong Zhang, who's the Senior Director for Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development in the sector group. We have Director for Environment, Yoko Watanabe, who is new to our group, and we're very happy that she's joined ADB. Thank you. And on my other side, Christine Engstrom, who is the Senior Director for Finance Sector Group, and also Pavitt Ramachandran, who is the Country Director for the Philippines. So we'll be presenting a few different perspectives this morning in terms of sector strategies, how we integrate environment as a thematic topic into our operations, and then addressing the finance angle in terms of how we finance these types of initiatives and activities, and putting that into a bit of perspective, because what does that actually mean when we go to the country level to take this forward? So with that, I would like to hand over to Chin Phong. And do I have a timekeeper? Okay, we only have 40 minutes for the session. We have 4 speakers and maybe a few questions. So if speakers can keep to 5 to 7 minutes, and if my timekeeper can flash some cards, we will stay on track. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Chin Phong.
Thank you so much, Susan. And also I welcome Mary to join us. I know she canceled the flight. She cannot travel to Manila and attend the session in person, but her insight this morning is quite inspiring. I be happy I have my colleague Yoko, Pavitt, and also our Christine join this session. It's very important to show how ADB we can work together to scale up the natural capital investment. And of course, we have our colleague come back from the tough day yesterday. You guys getting up very early, but you will come back very late, but still survive. So congrats. So let me kick off the discussion by sharing two things. One is again the challenges in terms of KMF lateral access. Two is my observations, how we can address the access together. In terms of the challenging, we already discussed yesterday. For this region, we are very rich in biodiversity, natural capital, but same time we also know that many of the ecosystem in region, from the tropical forest to the coral reef, already being degraded beyond the repair. And then, of course, is the COVID-19 is only one evidence to show how severe. This is just a tip of the aspect of the pandemic. And also the 60% of this pandemic come from the zooletics. This is reflect the food system, the need for the food system transformation is zooletics is disease from the animal to home being. And in this case, zooletics disease is also the reflections largely, this driven by the destruction of the nature. So this is a warning, but sometimes we also say the assessment, the pandemic zoonotic disease hotspot is still in the Asia Pacific. In terms of the change, of course, this is a region also the half of the undernourished population is living here. 400 million people in the region is undernourished, and another 50 million just added after the COVID-19. And then if you look at the before and after the COVID-19, we will say Asia Pacific has the highest number of the people facing the highest risk of the food insecurity, and then it is 3 times higher than the COVID-19 because of the impact of the climate change, impact of the pandemic, impact of the biodiversity loss, and also the economic stress. At the same time, also this region is of course is a center of the climate change, and also a sort of the most vulnerable region of the climate change as well. On the one hand, this region is now contribute to the over half of the world's total GHGs, but on the other hand, is also projected this region is also experience disproportionately high vulnerability from the climate change. Just think about it, the 2016, the Typhoon Haiyan destructed the livelihood in the region, and also last year, the floods in Pakistan was the key reminders of the consequences of the climate change, impact on the livelihood, food security, and also the essential infrastructures. So again, in terms of the access, climate change leading to the more frequent extreme weather, and then disrupting the agricultural and also cause the widespread food insecurity. And sustainable farming practices, and by the way, also driven further by biodiversity loss. If you think about traditional agricultural practices, use over 70% of the all resources and 50% of the land, and also lead to the causes up to the 80% of the biodiversity loss. And at the same time, biodiversity loss also reduces the resilience capacity of the ecosystem to adapt to the climate change, and then leading to the exacerbation of the climate change, and also further become on the food security. In this case, we very clear, without sustainability of the natural resources, we don't have food security in this region. It's very clear. So this access interlinkage challenging facing this region very clear. Question is how we're going to address it. So from the IDBN, I have the 3 observations. Number 1, many of our colleagues know last year, because of the food crisis, President must have announced $14 billion food security. Of course, after this investment, food insecurity is still with us. We still look the new ambition, But very clear, we agree when we address this short-term responses, provide the working capital SME, provide social protection. But at the same time, we also say addressing climate change through the biodiversity loss should be central to the comprehensive transformation of the food system in this region. That's why when we build up this food security package, long-term responses are very important. We incorporate 3 key elements. One is climate smart agriculture, 2 is the digitalization supply chain, and then the 3 is natural-based solutions. This is a number 1 observation. Again, this is when we look forward for the future ambition, food system transformation, and also the long-term food system resilience, very critical. Again, we say in this region, without addressing food insecurity, we also don't have a sustainable natural capital, and also we cannot, achieve our ambition for the climate change. Second, of course, yesterday and also this morning, Mary was talking about the law of government, the law of MDB, and also the law of the civil society. But I want to emphasize the law of the government. Government need to play a very, very important role to change the regulatory framework, incentivizes the natural capital investment. This includes the development of a policy to encourage the sustainable land use. That's why, when we work for the PRC, we want the Yangtze River introduce equal compensation regulations, is very essential. That's the reason we also build up the natural capital lab here, work together with all of the countries to help out the countries. One is, of course, natural capital accounting, but sometimes the government also need to play the law, change their regulations, enable the private sector investment, also introduce the payment for ecological services. Of course, IDB and other partners, we can work together to introduce the blended financing together with our lending to scale the natural capital. Lastly, I want to say from our end, we are going to adopt a cross-sector approach. My colleague in this panel, Harvey, Susan, we worked long time ago together for this Yangtze River framework approach. Again, when we meet with the Bangladesh delegation yesterday, one of the key issues together, we agree for the key issues, we need to work together. And from the ADB end, I was happy to say Yasmi joined this panel yesterday, when they meet with the Bangladesh delegation, they also agree to adopt the Yangtze River framework approach, replicate the approach to Bangladesh to scale up the Bangladesh resilient capacity to adapt to the change of the climate change, and at the same time also scale up the natural capital investment, address the risk of the food insecurity in Bangladesh. Let me just pause here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chin Fong, and thank you, Darlene, for the timely timekeeping. It was a good introduction to the session because you've gone over the issues in terms of the challenges ahead, which face food security as well as livelihoods. The nexus is a very complicated issue for us to address, which is a challenge. Often we have a focus on climate change as an entry point, but as we're all here today to discuss natural capital and nature, there is an alternative approach for us to take forward to address this issue and challenge. And with that, I would like to ask Yoko to join the discussion and give us some insights in terms of taking forward nature first in this agenda. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And great to be back here. And after a really fruitful field trip yesterday, and I think, we all were convinced and I think really saw firsthand the sort of power of nature in supporting the economy, supporting the livelihood, and how we can really, people working with nature on fisheries and wetlands and the sort of tourism that we saw yesterday, and how vital it is to really, ensure the conservation as well as sustainable use of natural resources on the ground. And really nice to get to know everyone through the trip. So today I wanted to kind of highlight the nature, the natural capital and economy, and also the relationship with climate change, and then also lead to how important and vital that integrated approach is important moving forward, and how the momentum right now, there is really a opportune moment right now with climate change and also discussion on more towards sustainable development and achieving sustainable development goals. So I just wanted to highlight a few points for that and contribute to this discussion today. So first of all, I think, the current mess in a way, one of the key failures to date is the society and economic system has not, adequately valued the nature. And this is a key reason that humanity is using up the planet's resources beyond the rate that is regenerable and replenishable. And we really need to really think about the rapid Asia's development has really actually built on these natural resources, but actually depleting on it. And as Jim Fen and others mentioned, 60% of our region's GDP, almost like $20 trillion, is at risk with natural resources. And we have kind of repeated over the past few days about how vital to ensure the ecosystem services and keep the natural capital, both the asset and flows, to ensure this long-term sustainability in the region. And particularly, if you think about, the nature, failing to value nature places on the society and economy at significant risk right now. And it really is a threat to sustainable development and environmental sustainability. And ecosystem service are also vital to really poor and vulnerable communities. And we saw up front yesterday at the coastal area, how people are in sort of threat with typhoons and segmentation and many other things that are happening. So, valuing the nature as a form of capital and translating it to important into a language that capital market, can understand is really important. And allowing the market participants to recognize their current investment and impact to the nature is really a key tool that we have been talking about this whole week. And I think there is really a momentum to do more. And I'm sure, my friend Christine and others will be talking about this more with different financial tools and financial mechanism. We can really increase the resources and increase the natural capital investments moving forward. So I just talked about, how important natural capital is for the economy, but I also want to emphasize that, as Suzanne mentioned, how we can put nature at the forefront of the climate change discussion right now globally. Because, as we all know that climate change have boosted its recognition, but in a way, biodiversity and nature is considered almost like the second run. But if you really think about solutions to climate change, we really need to bump up how we can conserve nature and ensure that the healthy ecosystem can absorb those carbons and also store it, and also adapt to the changing society. As we saw yesterday, nature can be key resources in adapting to coastal erosion and other things, and we can really work on more adaptation measures by having a more effective coastal management system, river basin system, other mechanism that we are facing. So with that, I just wanted to, mention that climate change needs nature as a solution, considering that more than half of the carbon is actually stored in ecosystem. And if depleting these ecosystem, we are not going to be achieving the 1.5 degree goals, nor the climate change sort of agreement. And also, as many of you might be involved, but the Convention on Biodiversity and other conventions have committed on the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which all the countries here represented have endorsed and moving forward to protect and conserve the 30% of the land and ocean moving forward. And that would also help us boost the economy, boost the climate change sort of solutions, and moving forward with more integrated approach in addressing these issues. So as Ching-Fen also mentioned, it is not that food security and livelihood and also nature, these actions are not a separate thing. We can bring all these efforts together. And one of the key mechanism is the nature-based solutions. And nature-based solution in a way brings in all the sort of multi-sectoral approach in addressing the current dire situation with climate change, such as, working on flood controls and adapting to the changing climate by using more ecosystem-based approach to these issues. And I think that example of such as working on communities on floodwaters and conserving mangrove forests, like yesterday that we saw in Balanga, is really, really a good example of what we can do moving forward, and also really addressing the livelihood issue of the local communities. And so by saying that, I really would like to sort of, emphasize the need of bringing in a multi-sectoral approach towards these issues. And for that, ADB is really transitioning right now to really address these issues in a more sort of holistic way by bringing in all their expertise to address these issues from different sectors, and also mainstreaming environment towards these sectors, such as agriculture is of course one, and energy, transportation, other issues. And I think, we are moving beyond the do no harm kind of approach with the safeguards, and we're really moving to a proactive, more do good on environment and nature, and using that natural capital assessment and accounting really helps us move towards that direction. And so as we sort of committed with other MDBs on the sort of nature commitment and increase nature positive investment moving forward, I think building on our sort of resources and expertise in blending in different resources from private sector and public sector, we are able to support the developing member countries and move forward with a more integrated solution like the Yangtze River Basin and many other sort of nature-based solutions moving forward. And I'm really looking forward, again, to put nature first, as Suzanne forwarded, mentioned, and really address these complex economic and also political situation right now, and work together as a society, bringing in different expertise and address this dire situation on climate, economy, and other issues. So with that few words, thank you very much. And I look forward to the further discussion.
Thanks, Yoko. And yeah, I think you made it very clear in terms of where we're at with the climate agenda, that nature really is a solution to that. And we do have opportunity to bring forward nature-based solutions as a realistic alternative to the traditional gray infrastructure that we have. Thank you. Okay, so it gives me great pleasure now to introduce a new panelist to the workshop, Christine Engstrom, perhaps one of the most important people in the bank. As Senior Director for Finance, she is responsible for helping us to get money out the door to finance the type of initiatives that we're talking about. So very important, and also a lot of responsibility in terms of how we can address the financing nature agenda. So Christine, welcome to the group, and please.
Thank you so much for that warm and generous introduction. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and also was really excited to hear about your field trip yesterday as well too. It's always great to get out of the auditoriums and out into some fresh sunshine and see what interesting things are going on. So as really well known, nature and business is very dependent upon nature. However, if you look at the private sector and its funding of nature, it's very small. So still, as you all know, by and large done by the public sector. There was a study that was done in the EU, and only 3% of MBS funding was from the private sector. So I thought maybe we'd start off with some challenges in terms of private sector financing and then also talk about some of the solutions that are offered through MDBs and the broader community, because it really is going to take a number of different types of interventions to support MBS. So from the financial sector perspective, there's a lot of problems in terms of knowledge gaps and awareness of nature-based solutions. They're grappling right now with Paris alignment, and that is still very nascent in most of our DMCs in the bank. So to layer on nature on top of that, to them is something that's just kind of unknown, and it's maybe a bridge too far right now for them, to be honest with you. Data is missing, as you know. So data for nature-based solutions, it's complex and it's also local, right? It's very localized. Definitional issues are there in terms of, what is this asset class? What am I really looking at? What am I investing in, right? How to really, again, going back to the data issue, how to measure and monetize it, right? So for the finance sector, they need to figure out what is the opportunity there. How do you actually monetize? And for the companies that are engaged in nature-based solutions, for them, it's also about identifying and maximizing those income streams, right? And in tourism, you can see that pretty easily, but in other areas, it can be more challenging. Along with that, there are issues in terms of oftentimes these investments or funding opportunities are pretty small, right? And they have long payback periods, and there's often more risk to them, right? So in the EU, again, with the same study, most of these MBS financings were under 2 million euros, which is very small for a bank. If it's an asset manager that's looking at investing in a company that is doing more nature-based solutions, there's not yet a lot of reporting from the companies themselves on what is nature-based solutions. Now they're doing climate reporting, but not this yet as well too. And then lastly, in terms of just building internal capacity within the financial sector itself to be able to identify and assess these risks and these opportunities is also, it's just not there right now. And that's something that we all need to focus on and help them and handhold them moving from climate and adding on to that with nature-based solutions. So from these kind of challenges, you see the opportunities in terms of, what needs to be done. So that is embedding MBS into policy and sectoral approaches, which is where ADB comes in, and is working with our DMCs to start to do that. Also taxonomies are, again, in terms of kind of clearer definitions, that's very important. And that links to also opening up capital markets investments. So that's what I see is a good future for us here in MBS, is, for instance, having biodiversity bonds. We have green bonds, we have blue bonds that also bridge over into nature-based solutions. We have orange bonds, which I guess are gender bonds and such, but we can be doing biodiversity bonds and things like that. But that all comes with taxonomies as well too. In terms of information, we're seeing a lot of interesting work being done with digital solutions, and digital is a very important component to nature-based solutions. And there are some companies that are doing really interesting things right now to help identify and monetize and value those assets. So I think that's one area that needs to be progressed and that we can support all of us collectively as well too. In the financial sector, GFANZ, which is the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero that was set up at COP26, it's now starting to build into some of its recommendations, deforestation and nature risk with the bank. So it's starting to do that awareness raising as well too. You also see that certain task forces are doing nature related financial disclosures for companies. So it's that the same approach that was done with climate a little bit earlier on is now being done with nature. And I think it's just going to be, it will accelerate much more quickly because of the work that's been done on nature. But there's still a lot of work that actually needs to be done within the finance sector to help them identify those opportunities and to be able to assess them and assess the risks there as well too. So what can be done and how can we support nature-based solutions through the finance sector? One is we can do mainstreaming of nature into the larger projects. So that should be not a quick win for us, but it is something that we are looking at doing at ADB, and we can help our own financial institutions do that as well too by bringing technical assistance. And even when we're financing a project ourselves on the private sector side, bringing in that element as well too. So that can be very pivotal in terms of raising awareness and then educating them and increasing capacity within the finance sector itself. In terms of the approach to bringing in financing to some of the projects that are not these large kind of projects that we can layer in the nature-based solutions, you really need to have multiple different partners coming to the table. I guess it's the feast analogy that we were talking about. And that's really in terms of looking at how you assess and address the risk components of these different types of projects, which entities can take those risks. So for instance, for a commercial bank to come in and take a risk, they want risk layering in there. So you're going to have probably impact capital coming in as well too alongside of them. You're probably going to need to have then MDBs coming in as well too, that catalytical type of capital that will be taking more risk or bringing in blended finance solutions to lower the cost of it, right? And then to bring in the mobilization of the private sector through different types of investment asset classes as well too. You're also going to need seed financing as well. Now ADB is doing some work in seed financing in nature-based solutions, which is really interesting. There are others out there that are starting to do that, but that's going to be needed as well to scale up these different types of ventures for the financial sector to come in and invest as well too. In terms of the MDB work in general, and on the government side, we are, as I mentioned earlier, providing blended finance using TA grants to merge with our own commercial financing or other commercial financing to lower the cost. As you've heard very well, Inter-American Development Bank out there is doing interesting debt for nature swaps, and we're looking at that as well too, and how you carefully construct those to create meaningful impacts. We need more flexible debt instruments out there as well too. Some people are talking about in terms of addressing these small ticket sizes of projects, which is really the critical key issue. We need to be thinking about how can we aggregate them and bring them into larger projects, kind of bigger packages that then the financial sector can come in and take a look at as well too. But I'll stop there. So those are some of the challenges for the finance sector, some of the things that we're doing. And in general, I'm just am really delighted to be here and excited to work with our financial sector in terms of partnering with them and then bringing in the private sector as well too, and our wonderful colleagues here as well too to help us do that.
Thanks, Christine. Yes, I think there are many challenges out there in terms of how we can bridge that financing gap, but I think it's also very positive in the sense that we do have Christine and the finance sector group who are on board with us to lead the transition in and help us to find solutions and ways for us to address that, from the traditional mainstreaming of how we do that in sovereign operations and looking at innovative solutions for private sector and other options for us to bring in. So I see lots of opportunity, and thanks for joining us in this agenda. Okay, to introduce our final panel member, Pavat Ramachandran. He is the country director for the Philippines. Prior to that, he was also country director for Mongolia. And prior to that, he was environment specialist in East Asia and my colleague and also Chin Fong's colleague at that time. So I have spent quite a few years learning from Pavat about environmental projects and the ADB in general. So thank you for that. But today, Pavat is going to bring a really interesting perspective to this panel discussion in terms of how we look at this from a country angle, because we can discuss generalities in terms of how we mainstream and how we strategize, but how we really introduce that into the country level operations. This is when it becomes important for ADB to work with our country directors, build on their knowledge and awareness in terms of how we can take this forward. Pavat, over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for all the nice words. Good to see Mary here as well. As Ching Feng mentioned, we met a few years back now already. It seems like yesterday, but yeah, it's been a few years. I'd like to give perhaps a different perspective on some of this, because you might have spent a lot of time talking about valuation and assessment and integrating that into the economic planning, decision making, sectoral planning. The point was made here. In fact, I saw on one of the chat lines just earlier that the Philippines has now endorsed this PENCAS framework, which is a framework for looking at the impact of natural capital on different economic sectors. So quite a landmark legislation in and of itself. But just focusing on the Philippines for my intervention here, I think Philippines in some ways can serve as a microcosm or a template for some of the challenges and opportunities that we see. I was on a panel a couple of days back on water, food, energy nexus. And I made the point, which is, I think, quite relevant here as well, that when we talk about security, water security, food security, energy security, at the heart of it really is nature-based solutions. And I think this point was made on the panel as well. But climate change is actually compounding some of these pressures. So if you don't deal with these early and proactively, these are not, you're not talking about securities, you're really talking about insecurities, right? And it's about getting ahead of that challenge. So Philippines is, depending on different estimates, either the top ranked or the third or fourth ranked in terms of its risk profile, climate and disaster risk profile. So clearly a highly vulnerable country. This vulnerability, if anything, is increasing because of urbanization, more populations moving to low-lying areas prone to flooding and other issues. So, that case need not be overemphasized at this point because it's well known. But I want to stress two aspects here. One is to make sure that whatever we do from a natural capital standpoint has to have a programmatic connection and linkage, and the institutional engagement, the broader institutional engagement, so that you're tying in really with the country planning framework. And of course, from ADB side, the country partnership strategy and the program is really our hook into the government's planning. So here in the Philippines, they've got 197 flagship infrastructure projects. So they've a very, very strong commitment towards rolling out large infrastructure. This was something that started in the previous administration, has continued now under this administration. It's a big resource envelope, 160 billion, and a strong intent is to pull in private sector, PPP for the asset management, O&M, operations maintenance of these investments, but also a strong commitment now to look at more green infrastructure. They're rolling out a lot of renewables, offshore wind, port development associated with that. And we have, from ADB side, a very strong engagement on this program across rail, roads and bridges, flood, disaster resilience. So I think first and foremost, this program then becomes your pivot, as it were, to tie in terms of our programming and our planning. So just a few illustrations of how we are trying to do this. Some of you may know that there's a new Clark City north of Manila, and there's a large, very significant rail connection which ADB helped finance along with JICA from Malolos Clark, and then the same connection now goes down to Calamba. We've been part of this. It's a 7 billion investment. The entire two investments are the biggest investments ADB has done anywhere in the Asia Pacific. And New Clark City itself has been designed, and we engaged with the master plan to ensure that this was green from the start. So working with the Environment Thematic Group, Jeff co-financed, but also with our OMDP colleagues, PPP colleagues, to make sure that the city was designed to be smart, resilient, green, and benchmarked to international standards in terms of integrating biodiversity considerations. So Singapore was used as the yardstick for planning. And there is a sustainability management office whose only task is to monitor and manage this process, right? So just one example there. And again, the link with the sovereign investment, the public sector investment is key here. We rolled out and had approved a little earlier in the year a flood disaster risk resilience program covering 3 river basins. And the idea is to then scale up, do 3 more and progressively take on more. This is a subset of 17 priority river basins that the government has identified as key in terms of disaster exposure, vulnerability. And as part of this effort, we really made sure that it was not just the so-called gray infrastructure, right? So not just the hard structural infrastructure, but really trying to make room for the river and trying to address the natural hydrological attributes of these river basins themselves in terms of their capacity to carry nutrients, sediments, fresh water. So this was done, and we also looked at early warning systems, hydromet structural measures. So this was very much an integrated effort to weave in both the hard and the soft infrastructure into the design. Again, the point being made that it was done very early in the piece as part of the the master planning process here. The last, I think I see Duncan sitting there, so he won't be happy if I don't mention this. We have a very important initiative, which is the Regional Flyway Initiative. I think a lot of work has gone into this. This is a flagship program. We've identified 12 sites here in the Philippines, which are priority sites for migratory birds. But the equally important is the wetland importance of these sites. And so there's a 3 million Jeff TA allocated already towards this process, but the plan is to mobilize additional private and public capital towards a long-term conservation and livelihood support program across, not just here, but across the Asia Pacific region. So again, I think very aligned with the way that we are looking at the program. Last point, and I'll stop here, I see the 1 minute sign being put up, is I just want to go back when I used to work in the Philippines some 10 or so years back. And we had a program called INREM. It was the Integrated Natural Resource and Environment Management Program. And challenging project to implement. It was a very, we knew that going in, but it was indeed quite challenging later on to implement. But during the design, what eventually carried the day with the authorities, and the NEDA board here is chaired by the president. That's the final authority in approving a project. What really mattered to them was the translation of all of this into fiscal benefits, into jobs, into revenue streams, and livelihood benefits. And we made the case that this was an extended conditional cash transfer program in line with the social cash conditional transfer program. We said this is going to create green jobs. This is going to, obviously improve livelihoods. And so I think let's not lose sight of that when we talk of this, the link with the green economy, green jobs is crucial. So let me stop here. Hopefully some food for thought there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pavat. I think that was an important example in terms of taking this program forward. We really need to embed this in national strategies and ensure that we're aligning with national development agendas. So thank you for really bringing that forward with the Philippines example. That's it from the panel, but I can open it up to the floor for any questions. We have a few minutes. Over here.
Good morning. Myself, Dr. Sarangi from the Ministry of Environment, India, New Delhi. Sir, my observation again, my inquisitiveness is regarding the climate, food, nature nexus. We are talking of the climate crisis, the carbon emissions, the carbon pricing aspect, and of course there is CBAM, which is coming now. Those issues are there. It will affect almost all the developing countries. In this context, I want to know the role of ADB so far as the investment patterns are concerned. What sort of investment has to be taken, whether it is PPP mode or any contemplative and articulative investment which can be taken into account, because this climate change effects is going to have multifarious effects with regards to biodiversity loss, with regards to control of pollution, which is being talked in the triple planetary crisis of the multilateral fora. So exactly, I want to know what sort of investment aspects will be covered, because this will be linked to finance, and finance is the lifeblood of various economies, and it will cut across various countries. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Would Jinfo?
Yes, thanks so much. We have the country dialogue with South Asia, and then they started with Bangladesh yesterday. Of course, India is our very important target countries. Again, when we're talking about the ambition for the climate change, we're talking about $100 billion out of 100 billion, 34 billion is for the adaptation. And now, of course, we announced a package, a $14 billion food security package. We also think about how we scale up to the 2030. Same time, when I briefed into the President Masa last year, we were also talking about we need to build up our natural capital or natural-based solution ambition. So again, we have the package, but we still discuss. Again, for the India, for example, when we're talking about food security, we are talking about right now is not necessarily disclose as a big ambition, but I will say for India, if we're talking about kind of official data, President Massa and also India government, we're talking about $25 billion for the next 5 years. I would say 5 billion should come from the agricultural, food, natural resources sector. So that is our aim for the 5 years. But if you add up to the 2030, I think we need to build up our package for saving or $8 billion together, addresses the food, nature, and also the climate nexus. Let me just pause here. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you. To supplement that, Christine?
Yeah, no, just in terms of some of the solutions that are being offered from ADB through the finance sector, through the private sector side. So on our venture capital work that we're doing, we are providing kind of climate smart solutions. So investing in the early stage, which is really important. To the financial sector, we've done a lot of agri investing and funding in the past and through microfinance industries as well too. And as we're kind of shifting and moving forward with these issues, we're also providing technical assistance to the banks to help them look at how can you actually work with the smallholder farmers to make it more green or to make it more smart as well too. One other thing that we're doing that supports food security is actually we're working through the logistics side as well too. So for instance, we had done a large loan to Sri Ram in India to fund their logistics services in rural areas to make sure that we're getting the food to the markets faster. And that's really connecting the rural communities to the major markets as well too, to prevent food spoilage. So there are different types of kind of avenues that we're addressing some of these issues, just as a few examples.
Thanks, Chris. We can offer perhaps one more question and then we can go for tea break, please.
Hello, I'm Jiaqi from AIB in Beijing, and my question is about current thoughts on infrastructure, not just projects that's not a nature-based solution, which is maybe the majority of the investment that MDB is doing. I understand Christine has mentioned the issues with data, but I was wondering if you could elaborate more and what's the next step that is happening to measure the impact to investment that's not nature-based solution.
Let me see whether I got the question right. You were saying in terms of infrastructure that's not nature-based, how do you go about measuring the impact of these investments, right?
Right, which I think is maybe the majority of the investment that MDB is doing.
Well, I mean, I think there's two ways. One is to make sure that you integrate environment and nature-based considerations into the planning of these investments right from the get-go, the point that was made earlier. And being very intentional and deliberate about the linkages that are fostered from this investment. Just to give you one example, here in the Philippines, we are in the last stages of preparing. It's really an iconic infrastructure project that will go across Manila Bay. It's from Bataan to Cavite. It's a 32-kilometer bridge, probably the second longest bridge once it's built. But it's not just a bridge, right? It's at the end of the day, it's not just a piece of infrastructure. It has to foster spur development in the connecting provinces. And we want to make sure that that development is green, is sustainable and resilient, right? So the point being that when the bridge is being designed, you are also putting in place those entry points in terms of the master plan in those provinces for transit-oriented development, for green development, energy efficient development, and creating the foundation to then attract private sector, because a lot of this will in the end come from private sector. So it's a roundabout way of answering your question, but in short, I think even with your hard infrastructure, there are many ways to make sure you include the green elements.
Thank you. If I could follow up is, I understand currently the method is about do no harm and trying to evaluate what could have been hurt by building those infrastructures. Sorry, I'm mentioning infrastructure. But is there any like pilot project that's pushing this forward a little bit, but it's not a nature-based solution? Sorry, it's a hard question.
Okay. Yeah, the do no harm is very much a safeguard approach, which ADB has to all projects. But we want to move beyond that approach because we can actually do better. And that's when we come into looking at every project from a mainstreaming approach, as Pavat mentioned, in what is it that we can integrate into a project which goes above and beyond the do no harm, because that's kind of the minimum level that we want to achieve. But when we look at a project, whether it's from the transport sector, energy sector, what is the added value element that we can have to that project to integrate nature elements, whether it's biodiversity or looking at ecosystem health or the impact of the project on ecosystems as such. So there are many entry points and we are taking that forward. It was in COP26 that the MDB signed up to the nature statement, nature, people and the planet. And under that statement, we do have a commitment where we want to look at how we can integrate the nature positive approach into what MDBs are doing. So at COP28 this year, we will be introducing the general principles that MDBs will take forward in terms of how we intend to measure that element of nature positive, and AIIB is also in that group, so you're part of that one. But it is a challenge, but it is something that we also think that this project, in terms of how we're looking at natural capital assessments and accounting, can influence that decision making in terms of not only what projects we're financing, but what are the added value or elements that we can put into those projects to ensure that it's a little bit more nature positive.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one observation. Again, I understand where they come from, the IAP question about this. Again, when we're talking about do no harm and also do good, but probably we change the terminology here. Talking about financing green and also green finance. When we're talking about the green finance, basically we will say greening the financial system, including the MDBs and public investment bank, and also the private sector. That's the reason we need to introduce this taxonomy, and we need to work together for the sort of the framework. Again, this is a greening the financing system is a bottom line. But sometimes we also need to take a more practical approach, is a financing green. So today we're talking about the financing natural capital. But we need to have the tool. We need to also enable the government to change the regulatory framework and also introduce the bank financing, make the investment bankable. That's the reason we have the financial sector here, environmental sustainability group here, and also our country director, country office here to think about how to make it happen. I think greening financing system is hard, but we make a very good progress already. But financing green probably much harder. So that's the reason we give this award to the community today, discuss about scale up, investment in the natural capital. Let me just pause here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chin-Fong. And I think with that, we now might close this session because your break is at risk if we continue any longer. I would like to thank the panel for joining us for the first session this morning. It's been an interesting discussion in terms of putting forward the different opinions and approaches. And most of all, would like to thank Mary for joining us in the very first introduction. She has been a cornerstone of the project. We miss her not being here with us, but grateful that she can join online. And apologies to the late night, Mary. Thank you.
Not immediate. Can we reassemble in 10 minutes, please? So we'll start at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Start. And, I think people at the back. Okay, yeah, now you can hear us. Well, yeah, okay, so good morning to everyone, and it's nice to see you all back here. I believe you had a very good, at least some of you had a very good field visit yesterday. Unfortunately, some of us were not allowed to join the field visit because of other commitments. But still, I think what you saw yesterday is quite relevant to what we are going to be discussing today, in this session. So this session is actually quite a seamless continuation of the discussion from this morning, which was mostly about, so how do we now get on with financing these very important solutions to addressing our development challenges, particularly the challenges faced by increasing climate vulnerability, but also, increasing threats to biodiversity and land degradation, and so on. So just to set the context, you heard in our first day, during the first day, there was a presentation by our sector chief, Mr. Ramesh, and he put up a slide where he showed that there is a financing gap of about 711 billion every year to meet the financing requirement of addressing climate change in particular. That's a big number. It's a huge number. The UNEP had done a similar study which showed that annual financing for what we call nature-based solutions is in the order of about 150 billion, but it needs to go up at least three times that much in order to address the real challenges that we face. So these are huge numbers, and obviously these numbers are way beyond the means of any government to finance. So this is why we need to start thinking about alternative solutions or alternative or innovative ways to finance what we call nature-based solutions or addressing nature positive development. So we have here a panel of specialists from the ADB, and each of us is going to bring to you some experiences from our work, and actually just getting into some of the details of work that ADB has done, and trying to showcase how these examples can then be scaled up into something bigger. I think with that, I will first introduce to you Mr. Duncan Lang. I think you heard in the previous session, there was reference to Duncan because he's also our project team leader for a very innovative program called the Asian flyways initiative, right?
Yeah.
I have to get my. Sadly, I'm also going to hear about it for the first time, and that's because I work in an area that is not covered by the Asian Flyways Initiative. But Duncan's a senior environment specialist with the bank, and he's worked here as but before joining the bank, he has also worked with BirdLife International and also developed led ADB's support for developing the mapping tool on energy planning called Avistep, which is I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that today or not.
Today, but...
No? Okay. So anyway, Duncan, over to you.
Thank you very much. So yes, I am talking about the Regional Flyway Initiative, and probably everybody's getting a bit bored of hearing about it, to be honest. But maybe just to kick off, I think I was listening to Warren on earlier in the week, and he was saying about him getting annoyed, and we need to do more. We need to scale up massively. And I think the beauty of this initiative is it really has the scale that we really need. And so I think, you know, linking projects together that give that compound benefit from adding each site together to deliver more than the sum of their parts is something that I think we really think that the RFI, Regional Flyway Initiative, can deliver. So perhaps I could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I mean, this is just really the overview, but the number there at the top is the big one, 3 billion in investment in sustainable management and protection of sites to give that flyway level impact. We have this kind of mandate to do this through a number of international agreements that our developing member countries have signed up to. The one that we use as a real hook for us is the Partnership Strategic Plan. But then there's also CBD, Paris Agreement, Ramsar, and UNESCO, and the Convention on Migratory Species as well. And I added in there ADB's pledge on the climate part. And, you know, we heard earlier on about 34 billion that Qingfang was saying. I see nature taking a good chunk of that, you know, and actually it's not about just adaptation, it's mitigation too. These wetland sites can deliver on that. You know, we said we want to have that regional scale impact. We do cover our analysis work on 10 countries, but we're kind of focusing on 8 because there are real developing member countries. And we're at the moment, we're in that development phase, which will go to the end of next year, but we've actually had a bit of an extension into 2025 as well. But now we're starting to see the process running in parallel between the development phase and the implementation phase when we've already got projects going on. And at the moment, under my TA, technical assistance, we're trying to do work and analysis on 50 sites to try and get investments in those sites, which could deliver over 2 million hectares in under protection or sustainable management, maintain the species numbers that use those sites. And while I'm, you know, pretty keen on birds, you know, I used to be an ornithologist, I wouldn't say it's the same for necessarily all you guys. And it's not the same for ADB, as you might not be surprised to know. So really doing a project which delivers for climate, but also supports the local livelihoods is really important. And I think wetlands are so good at that. They do a lot of different things. So they're very good for us. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're in the development phase at the moment. We've been working in capacity needs assessment work. We've been identifying the sites of highest priority, and I'll show you them in a minute. We've also been developing a granting mechanism, which would then run in parallel with our projects in the future. And once we've done all this, we'll then move into the implementation phase, which will run, we hope, for the next 10 years. And those will include actually doing those the project investments. We also are thinking of trying to establish a partnership to monitor those sites, to check that we say we're doing what we're saying. You know, are these sites really delivering for the nature that we're talking about? And also that will be when we implement that granting mechanism too. Next slide, please. So at the moment, we've now completed our phase 1, which is related to identifying these priority sites. And we're now moving into the second phase, which I'll talk a bit more about at the moment. But you can see once we've done this second phase, we'll then move into the project concept, early concept development, and then implementation phase after that. Next slide, please. So I am not going to go into this in detail at all, but I can just say that there was a bunch of really fantastic scientists who worked together with a huge ton of data. It took them probably a year longer than we thought it would take because they did such a good job. But basically, they worked with all this information to identify these priority sites. And if we go to the next slide, we've got a summary of them. So there's 147 sites spread across the 10 countries. You may wonder why we focused on these countries. These are all ADB developing member countries. And we did, in fact, have Myanmar originally in there as well. But unfortunately, because of the political situation, we couldn't include the country in the project. We've also now expanded in to cover PNG. Peter's here somewhere, so he'll be happy to know that too. And the sites, they go from a level of 60 in China, which shows a huge number and the importance of China as really the keystone country for the flyway. And then we go to sites like countries like Laos, where we have very few. Next slide, please. So just to say, we're in the second phase now, which is where we're working on the analysis and talking to the governments. And the idea of that process is to refine the sites down to a more manageable list to do the concept development for. Next slide, please. So this is quite complicated, but it kind of gives an overview of the approach we've taken. The first bit is really to say, and this is relating to the ecosystem services work, which I think a lot of you be more interested in today. We're using TESA as our main base toolkit. Key bit is at the beginning is to identify the sites, classify the habitat types, and then document the ecosystem services. Then we can run processes in parallel where we move into a GIS-based analysis. We're using different tools there. Invest is obviously part of the mix. We're using Waterworld and Costing for Nature. We're also doing GIS analysis with ArcGIS and Google Earth Engine. Then moving into the detailed assessment, we also then have been starting to talk to people. Don't know what's going on here. Yeah, we also are then talking to people on the ground in certain sites, like in Brong Prek Lepo, where we've been talking to local people there about what the services are important for them. We're also needing to develop country specific approaches, like in China, where GEP will be important. Stakeholder engagement across all this as well. Next slide, please. So for the participatory workshops, we're using a bunch of different guidelines to build questionnaires. We're taking elements of each of those, putting them together. TESA's the base, but then we're using RAWES because this is about wetlands. And then desk-based analysis using those tools. I put Invest in there because of it's our main tool, I'd say, but we're using other ones as well. Next slide, please. We're also using, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we're using some of these main big global data sets, and they're really the ones that are the backbone for those analyses. Next slide, please. This is just to show, I think top left, you may recognize that because that's Balanga. These are some of the workshops that we've been running in different countries, Cambodia and Philippines. Next slide. So just very quickly, because I'm being told time over, the analysis that we've come out for some of the work we did in the Philippines. This is the ecosystem services that we identified from our analysis. It's interesting that it shows the top 5 there. I think this is fairly unsurprising that those sites give. This is across the country, by the way, not just in one site. But if we go to the next slide, or I can do it. Okay, this shows what the drivers of change were thought. Now, I should caveat that this was by a group of folks who were really related to the central government. And so the restoration and conservation is not what you would necessarily expect as the highest top 5 driver. But I think this reflects what they think they're going to be doing at their sites. And so I would say that's quite a positive message. Similarly, some of the other things there about research and education, again, important for them. If we talk to the local people down at the community level and aggregated their responses, I think the outcome would be very, very different. And then this is really just the last slide here to show some of the values that we have for the Philippines. The reason there's 8 out of the 12 sites is because you need the boundaries, and we didn't have them at the time. You can see the amount of carbon that those sites are delivering in the different habitat types. We were talking about the averted loss damage there. Mangroves, they play a key role, and across our sites, that's how much they maybe are delivering to those local stocks. And then in the end, this is what our overall ecosystem services assessment work will do. This is what we want to deliver in the end, which will help us to get to governments, to get them interested in doing projects. And I'm not going to go into this, but this is what you identify from it. And this is how it can benefit into your early project concepts. And this is what we think some of our concepts may look like in the end, focusing on different areas. And this is a kind of wish list landscape. And I should say that climate change cuts across all these, will be very important for us. I could have obviously talked for another 20 minutes, but I will shut up now. So thank you very much. And if you need more, I can talk. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Round of applause to you. So thank you very much. And I think that demonstrates ADB's, if you like, ADB's value addition in trying to bring such scale, at least investments of scale, that scale, $3 billion is quite substantial, I would say. It's regional at the moment. I presume you might eventually go to Asian at some point. And I think interestingly, when you pointed out what the countries expect to get out of it, that's really telling, because, you know, as you pointed out, there are co-benefits. It's not just the conservation outcomes that we get from this, but actual economic returns from tourism, particularly from tourism, I would say. And that's the core benefits that these sort of programs bring. So I think a question I would have for you, but maybe we can keep it till later, is how do you make, you've done a lot of assessments to make the case as to why this is important, but what's in it? What's in it for a government to continue to invest and finance programs like this once ADB turns off the funding tap? So it's something to think about. You know, how do you make this program sustainable? I say that particularly from a personal experience of my own, managing a program in the Greater Mekong subregion called the Greater Mekong Subregion Co-Environment Program, covering 6 countries. One of our colleagues from Cambodia is actually here in the room. And we did a lot of great assessments, demonstrated the importance of biodiversity conservation across the countries. And ADB continues to finance this program, but there is a risk. There's a risk that it may all not continue once ADB stops funding. So that's something we need to keep in mind, I think. Okay, so I think I'm next with the presentation. So let me start. So my presentation is about nature-based solutions. Now, you heard quite a bit about nature-based solutions in the previous session as well. I'm going to really get down to a little more detail as to what we really mean by these, and actually explain some of the benefits and why these are important for us. Maybe next slide. Oh, I can do it myself now. Yeah. This one? Oh, that one, right. Yeah, okay. So I'll talk a bit about what nature-based solutions are, a definition, if you like, why these are important, and what governments can do to promote them, and what ADB can do to promote them more. Okay, so the IUCN defines nature-based solutions as actions to promote, sustainably manage, and restore either natural or modified ecosystems that address a societal challenge that we face as societies. And while doing so, also being able to simultaneously create benefits for biodiversity conservation, as well as other co-benefits. If you were to say this a bit more simply, it's really about what we might consider as non-traditional solutions. Non-traditional meaning our traditional solutions to address some of the problems that we face, like flooding or scarcity of water or land degradation. Our traditional solutions are what we call gray infrastructure. You know, we build flood retention walls, embankments, and polders to prevent floods or do river training projects. We have huge reservoirs and canals to divert water between basins to convey water to dry areas. We do some of that ourselves in ADB. We do lots of interventions to reduce land degradation, to prevent landslides by building embankments and so on, or seawalls to prevent sea level rise and various other things. But just as those are solutions that we need to consider, there are also a set of non-traditional or non-conventional solutions, which primarily depend on harnessing nature's ability to solve these problems. And that's why they're called nature-based solutions. Yeah. So what are these? For instance, what are the benefits of doing this? Firstly, it often offers a more cost-effective and a more sustainable solution than a very hardcore gray infrastructure-based solution. The pictures on the left here show what is a typical bioengineering solution for embankment stabilization. So you could have a very expensive one like the one on top, or you could have a bioengineering solution like the one in the bottom. And the one on the bottom is more sustainable, it's less costly. It also needs, maintenance and upgrading and so on, but it is more resilient, very often more resilient to the threats of climate. And that's the second point. These sort of interventions are increasingly relevant in the face of climate because, as you all know, we spend a lot of effort and time and resources to try and climate-proof projects, to climate-proof investments in infrastructure. But with increasing variability and increasing frequency of extreme weather, we are always sort of running to catch up and keep infrastructure climate-proofed. Whereas the bioengineering solutions or nature-based solutions are more adaptable and more able to deal with changes in climate change. Also, from the point of view of a climate footprint, a nature-based solution is also much more climate friendly because we use less concrete or gray material, if you like. So another reason for doing nature-based solutions is that they provide a lot of core benefits. I mean, we talked about them in the previous session too. Pavit talked about how one of the key points that governments make about why nature-based solutions are important is because they have important core benefits in terms of livelihoods. So, for instance, doing something that is more labor-intensive, like planting vetiver grass on a tree, on a slope, or protecting a watershed by community-based forestry, these sort of things are more labor-intensive and, as a result, also provide opportunities for livelihoods. Plus, they also have benefits in terms of improved biodiversity, biodiversity itself, or reduce, improving soil conservation and soil improvement or land improvements. And another point is that these sort of interventions provide governments opportunities to actually target new opportunities for financing. As an example, if a country is facing coastal erosion and decides to protect this coastline with expensive seawalls, they may not find too many interested parties interested to finance or co-finance those sort of interventions. But if that project was changed into a coastal wetland conservation project and a coral reef restoration project, there may be interested parties who are willing to get into a blue bond, private sector as well as other organizations might be willing to invest in a blue bond that can finance these sort of things. So these are very innovative ways of getting important investments done. So they're really win-win solutions for development as well as for nature. Now, what can governments do to support these nature-based solutions? These points were made in the previous session too. The governments and the people, representatives from governments here in this room should really consider, going back, I know my colleague from the National Planning Department of Sri Lanka is here, we should mandate that nature-based solutions are considered in every sector that requires investments in infrastructure. And that's transport, energy, water, irrigation, urban development, these sectors. It should be required that when they submit proposals for investments, public-private partnerships or public investments, they should consider nature-based solutions as at least as part of their interventions. Second thing is to develop guidelines and cost norms. Now, my colleague Isao is here from ADB. Yeah, here you are. And between Isao and myself, we've been implementing a small project in Bangladesh on bioengineering solutions. And one of the challenges we face is the government is interested to do these, but there are no cost norms for bioengineering solutions. And when the government is trying to prepare a detailed design and looking for cost norms, they cannot find any. And so they revert back to their old concrete solutions. So governments really need to improve development guidelines and cost norms for these solutions. Now, what can ADB do? This is my last slide, I think. So we should do more upstream work, just like what you've been doing, Duncan's been showing us. And we should integrate these nature-based solutions as a very core part of our country partnership strategies. That was also pointed out by Pavit in his previous, in the previous session. We also internally, I think, should develop guidelines, and I'm not sure, Isao, whether we've done this already for some sectors, but for sector-specific guidelines on how our project officers could actually look at nature-based solutions as part of project preparatory work, and then demonstrate the efficacy of these solutions through pilots like Isao's TA. So concluding this session, at least my presentation, these sort of nature-based solutions are really important, but at the moment they still remain as pilots. They're very much, demonstrations, small scale. We need to scale up, and to scale up, we really need to get more investment into these. This number that is on the second bullet comes from a study by Inter-American Bank, shows that only 0.6% or up to 1.4% of all climate financing globally is used in nature-based solutions. It should be way up in the range of 50 to 75% at least, because they're so complementary. Climate financing should be very much nature-based. So this is something we need to work on. And I think my colleague from private sector here will talk about solutions from the private sector, how we can bring private investments. And one idea that's coming around is natural asset companies. I'm not sure if you're going to touch on that, but this is an area that is really taking shape now. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions. But as my role as moderator, I'm going to use my discretion to ask Isao to say a few things about his TA during the session, the open discussion session. Thank you. So next, may I ask my colleague Takeshi to talk about another interesting program that ADB has been financing. I think he's been working on this forever. Takeshi is a principal natural resource economist at the ADB, focusing mostly on agriculture, food, nature solutions. And he administers agriculture sector projects, focusing mostly on value chains and so on. So Takeshi, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to acknowledge that actually Mary Ruckel Schoss, Executive Director, Natural Capital Project of Stanford. I mean, this is kind of co-presentation, so I'm going to do it with her, but because of time, I mean, she cannot make it. But first, we're going to show a video of her project. Then I'm going to give some presentation to kind of show where, I mean, we can cooperate each other. Just hold on. I mean, great thing about this video, or I mean, undertaking is, have you heard Oyu Tolgoi? I mean, that's huge mining giant in Mongolia, and they are really, generating so much national fund to support the economy, and they bring them in and then get them to finance Kashmir sector using public fund, IFC, International Finance Corporation. So I think they are doing beautifully this channeling fund from where lots of funds is generated. I mean, this business giant, then bring it into where actual funds are needed. I mean, that's something to do with nature. That's something to do with climate as well as livelihood. So I think it's beautifully done. And please show the video. Then I'll just continue. Thank you.
An expansive desert, a thriving grassland, a fertile prairie, a humming wetland. Often we don't realize an ecosystem's many values until they begin to disappear. Hundreds of millions of people depend on grasslands, which make up more than 40% of global land cover. In Mongolia, the Gobi Desert ecosystem performs a delicate balancing act. The rangeland supports nomadic herders and their livestock, sensitive and endangered wildlife, a massive mining operation, and a burgeoning cashmere industry. Here, the livelihoods of these nomadic goat herders are closely intertwined with the health of the rangelands. As worldwide demand for cashmere increases, overgrazing pressures and climate change impacts are threatening this vital ecosystem.
Энэ мал хувийн хөрөнгө болсон. Бид нар өсөх бүхэн бид нар мэддэг болсон. Холс төр мэддэггүй манай засгийн газар. Тэгээд хэмжээ хийж байгаагүй өсгдөг. Бэлчээрийн мал их өсөхөөрөө олон болохоор бэлчээрийн даац нь мууддаг. Тийм тал байдаг.
These threats illustrate a global challenge for rangeland management everywhere. So how do we develop systems that work for both people and planet? The Natural Capital Project enables nature-based solutions. Stanford University scientists are working with the Sustainable Kashmir Project, a unique partnership between a luxury brand group, an environmental nonprofit, and a mining company. The project was born of a shared vision for healthy rangelands and sustainable livelihoods.
The Sustainable Kashmir Project is a market-based conservation project.
As the main implementing partner in the field, the Wildlife Conservation Society educates and supports herders in sustainable pasture management and wildlife conservation. The goal is to lessen impacts on the ecosystem while producing a higher quality cashmere. In return, herders in the program are offered a premium price for their cashmere wool. Creating this sustainable supply chain is key for global luxury brand Kering, a project funder and founding partner. Gobi-based mining company Oyu Tolgoi also funds the project. Motivated in part by the environmental standards of its international lenders, Oyu Tolgoi wants to see a net positive impact on biodiversity across the region.
The main outcome of from this project for Oyu Tolgoi is improvement of rangeland quality.
The team's diverse perspectives create a unique mix of expertise and innovation to tackle this complicated issue.
changing a whole value chain is very difficult. We're trying to disrupt something that has been in existence for a couple of decades.
To ensure goals are met, the project needs a high-quality monitoring and evaluation protocol. But in an area as large as the Gobi Desert, traditional field-based monitoring is time-consuming and costly.
The rangeland ecosystem is really complex, and it's huge landscape. We need a technology, a model that can cover big landscape in a short amount of time.
To address this challenge, NatCap is using Earth observations powered by NASA satellites. NatCap links data collected from the field with remote sensing data. Funded by NASA, this first ever integrated approach allows the team to monitor a much larger area more frequently and more precisely.
The Natural Capital Project really brings a unique perspective on the environment and the ecosystem by looking at ecosystem services, which is a new approach for looking at the ecosystem for NASA.
Healthy regions of the Gobi provide sustenance for animals, sequester carbon, and lower the risk of sandstorms and flooding. The contributions that nature provides to people, also known as ecosystem services, can be modeled and mapped using NatCap's software platform, Invest.
Once we have an idea of how rangeland condition varies across the landscape, we can use that to feed ecosystem service models like we build at the Natural Capital Project in the Invest software suite.
Around the world, decision makers use Invest to consider nature when planning for the future. For the Sustainable Kashmir Project, NatCap's Rangeland Invest model lets project partners explore scenarios such as changes in livestock numbers, climate, and grazing practices. As team members implement Invest modeled scenarios on the ground, they're able to use satellites to monitor rangeland health, establishing what actions have impact and where. Measuring and verifying impacts is crucial.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Actually, please see, watch. I mean, it's like eight minutes and it's pretty comprehensive. So I'm going to give some presentation of what we have done and what we going, 1 minute left. Okay. All right. Can you show the presentation, please? Yeah. Oh,
I have to remind you, you have 1 minute left.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Right. Right. Okay. So, okay. Right. Yeah. So we have like three kind of pillars. I mean, I mean, my involvement is started in 2008. So it has been quite journey. And first one is a real desire of the country was initially they have plenty of Kashmir, but Kashmir products, when it comes to final products, it was China. So they are kind of crying that, you know, this low value addition part of hard part is in Mongolia, but lucrative part is all like go to China. So one day they are dreaming of making their own Kashmir more than say China. So that dream I really shared with them. So being working to value addition, that's one pillar. And the other is climate resilient herding sector, more like closely linked with the, you know, Stanford University they're doing. And then disaster response, like every 5 years, you know, they have winter disaster and can 10 to 20% of livestock population die, just one disaster. So we are providing this emergency assistance. Actually, share the presentation so you can see it later, but we are doing it beautifully. Actually, sovereign project, non-sovereign project. We are paving path for kind of non-sovereign projects investment by supporting SMEs. And then they come in for larger investment. And the sovereign side, we are starting one project. It's called Agriculture Rural Development Project Phase 2. I mean, that's starting from next year. And then I think private sector has just got transaction done on this, Gobi, the largest Kashmir companies lending. So it's going to be very exciting time to cooperate with the Stanford University. Okay, just a few pictures. These are, turnover. Okay, time over. Okay, sorry. This is winter shed, important to protect, insulate, these animals with shed. And we have to make sure we have enough hay so that they can sustain during winter. Sorry. Yeah, this is another wind. There are lots of, capacity building and planning of pasture management and livestock management with them. Yeah, there are lots of mapping, these things with them. And water is crucial, especially in winter. So we provide water points. And this is the actual victims of the winter disaster. They had like about 300 Kashmir goats, and they're all dead. So we brought food for animal, as well as we brought food for human and medicine and these things, It was then potential collaboration area is actually branding. We are promoting this branding, Mongolian noble fiber. But sustainability component is, kind of missing, and we wanted to have that in there. So we can probably match with this branding. We have done lots of work already. So if we can come up with this, sustainability component in the certification, that's going to enhance. Yeah. I stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Takeshi, and thank you to the Stanford team for that presentation, the video, which was really interesting. I think the key point I would take away from this is the beauty of the partnerships. Stanford bringing in the technology and the assessment tools, ADB bringing in the value support, technical support, and then the private sector bringing in cash and funding. So great. So let's move on to our last presentation, and then hopefully we'll still have some time for questions. I'm sure some of you must have some. So I'm going to ask Nurullah to speak to us about private sector's operations and how we support natural capital on nature-based solutions. So Nurullah is a senior investment specialist with the private sector operations department. And before he joined ADB, he worked for a fund called the Acumen Fund, Impact Investment Fund, and was leading the investments in agribusiness for Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So
thank you, Sanad. Great. So I'm going to talk about ADB's work on the private sector side in the area of natural capital. And by the way, Duncan, we borrowed the bird from your it's a popular bird at ADB, so thank you for that. So I'll share two examples of ADB's investments in natural capital. These are both transactions that we signed this year. I'll start off with a case study of Australis, which is one of the largest producer of barramundi in the world. As many of you would know, barramundi is a fairly resilient fish species, and Australis basically produces barramundi in deep ocean pens, which basically nurtures the fish in its natural habitat, and the ecosystem is much less vulnerable to climate change compared to land-based aquaculture systems. One of the other interesting things that the company is doing, they're producing seaweed, which when used as part of cattle feed, could significantly reduce methane emissions. So in terms of ADB's financing, we provided a blended finance solution to the company. We structured a convertible loan to fund the working capital needs of the company to expand their barramundi production. We also provided a $3 million grant for the company to work further on the seaweed commercialization. The ultimate theory of change is to support ocean-based aquaculture because it's much less resource intensive and much lighter on carbon emissions. The second case study that I'd talk about is DSNG in Indonesia. It is one of the leading sustainable wood producers in the country. The interesting bit about the company is that they work with smallholder farmers that practice multi-storied agroforestry systems, which act as a natural buffer against extreme temperatures. The company also actively promotes intercropping of the agroforestry systems with crops like coffee, rice, and corn to allow the farmers to diversify their incomes. In terms of ADB's support, we have provided a sustainability-linked loan to support the expansion of the wood processing capacity of the company. In addition, we are also providing a $500,000 TA to support the capacity building of smallholder farmers in areas of functional financial literacy as well as climate resilience. The objective, this was the first project in the agroforestry space, and the objective is to support additional similar projects in this very exciting subsector. I will now briefly talk about the big billion-dollar question: how do we scale these investments from the private sector? I think some of the discussion was some of the points already highlighted by one of my colleagues, Christine, in the panel discussion before this one, but I think it's still worth reiterating. Pipeline for such projects is quite limited. And I would just flag that we receive at least several emails every week about projects that claim to have a nature impact. The big challenge is bankability of these projects. And what does that mean? That means, you know, these projects don't have an operating history, a proven track record, which makes it extremely difficult to take exposure in. The other, I think, concern from the other challenge with the sector is that returns can often be low and uncertain, with significant investments required upfront and the returns way out into the future. So that is another inhibiting factor for private capital to come in. I think last but not the least is the whole talk around taxonomy, standardization. How do we establish the baseline? How do we track it? That capacity is quite limited in the private sector space. Now, the challenges also present opportunities, and we've seen models that have catalyzed other spaces which were difficult to crowd in private capital. So I just highlight some of those somewhat proven methods to catalyze capital investments in this important subsector. I think one of them is to use technical assistance to support pipeline and project development. We particularly like sustainability-linked loan structures, and we've done at ADB quite a number of them in the very recent past, because it provides just enough incentive to catalyze action on part of the private sector. So I think greater use of this instrument is going to be important to scale up private sector investment in this space. Viability of carbon markets. Carbon markets have been around for quite some time, and I'm not an expert in the subject, but whenever I see a component of carbon revenues in a project, we tend to heavily discount it because the markets don't seem reliable and predictable. I think blended finance solutions are going to be quite key, and it could take many shapes and forms. We've seen guarantee structures work for some investments, first loss structures, capital that would have a capped return, providing the upside to commercial capital just to crowd in that commercial appetite. And I think sharing of lessons learned is equally important. The kind of stuff that we are doing here is absolutely important because it's such a small community right now, and sharing the successes and failures would really help propagate what works and what doesn't. And lastly, to my earlier point around the need for investing in monitoring infrastructure, standardization, and an appropriate framework that resonates across the space is going to be quite important to catalyze private sector investment in this important area. I would just stop here and leave the rest for our discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time, which is appreciated. I think just one point I would take away and maybe leave with the audience is the need for blended financing. I think this, given the risks of private sector coming into these sort of investments, there's really a need to blend financing with grant, and there's plenty of it. So we just need to try and resource more grant funding to kind of make some of these projects more bankable. I think that's my takeaway point. So I think we still have about 10 minutes for question and answer. Less? Oh, we're already over, but we should still ask, at least take 2 questions. And maybe if there are no questions, oh, there are questions. Yes. Okay, please. Maybe you can introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Hello, my name is Christina Kadich. I'm an urban development specialist at ADB. So I work in water and urban rather than agriculture and environment. So we've had a lot of discussions about the importance of using TA funds to build a pipeline, the value of obviously natural capital. I'm happy to say that the first project I processed in 2015 at ADB was urban rehabilitation project, and it actually included a 90-hectare wetland, which was along the flyway. So happy to see, Duncan, your work. But I remember when we were developing that project, that wasn't initially part of it. And it took a lot of work in terms of developing that project and to include that component, because while we can use all of the TA resources we want, at the end of the day, a lot of our projects come from loans. So in terms of this panel's advice, you're all experienced ADB professionals and expert in this field. How can other sectors build in these components to really capitalize on the value of these kinds of investments while also serving the urban communities? And so I don't know if any of you have any opinions on that. Thank you.
Question, and then leaves time for us to ponder the answers.
Yeah, good morning. It's not really a question, it's more a comment. And I mean, a lot of things are just running through my mind at the moment. First of all, I want to say thank you to Duncan about the migratory species that you talked about, because some of those birds do end up in the Cook Islands. So I guess my question around, birds, it's around about indicators, about your natural capital investment around the indicator to see how your investment is working. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that if birds are a good indicator of a healthy system, ecosystem. So I think that's probably a really good indicator to show that your investment is working. The second thing I wanted to talk about is I guess you mentioned it, actually. We talk about nature-based solutions. We're talking about natural capital investment. but also getting it into contractual arrangement, particularly the loans. And I think you touched a little bit on it, because I tell you what, where I'm sitting and if we've got major infrastructure project and I want to talk about nature-based solution, I'm going to be laughed at by my government. If we're talking about huge road investment, airports, that sort of thing, because nature-based solutions is still not there. It's still not in the government realm. If you look at all the policies and strategies that exist today, you'll see very little mention of nature-based solutions. So I just more of a comment than anything else, but thank you.
Thank you for that. The first question, would you like to take it? Or you want to respond to the second one
I
first?
wanted
Yep.
to respond to the last comment made. I think on the private sector side, and in the food and ag space that I represent, we've seen quite an interest in nature-based solutions. And I think what has worked really well is the SLL framework, because if you ask corporates to move into sustainable action without an incentive on the table, yes, it's a difficult conversation. But the SLL structure actually offers an incentive to corporates to move in that direction, and that would have a very tangible impact. Well, I'll explain a little bit in terms of tangible or not, but it would have an impact on their bottom line. Because if you achieve the targets set as part of the SLL framework, there's a reduction in the interest rate that the borrower has to pay. And that's an immediate incentive for them to move into action. Now, I would qualify that by saying that the discount that we are able to offer on an SLL is not huge. So for instance, in a loan that is priced at 10%, for instance, we probably end up offering a 9.9% if those targets are met. And if you quantify that on a $10, $15 million loan, it's not going to come out as an earth-shattering figure. Maybe the company saves $40,000, $50,000 a year. But it has been an interesting sort of framework to trigger these corporates into action, because they see a clear benefit, however small. They see a branding opportunity. And some of these businesses, the sustainable actions are quite important to their long-term survival as well. So this is a trigger to move them into action. So for us, the SLL framework has been quite a bedrock for these conversations, with great response from corporates.
Would you like to respond to the first question?
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, as Cook Island government official says, it's quite tough to bring in, environment component in our loan project, especially. Lots of resistance, actually. Within ADB as well and outside. And how to manage is, from my experience, definitely we have to, get internal support as well as external support. And especially not only the line ministry, but also Ministry of Finance or Planning Ministry. Have experience with China, Yangtze River, big program, multi-billion. That time, we really worked with the planning ministry, and their mandate is we will change course of economic growth based on industrial development to, coexisting with biodiversity, environment sustainability. So we really try to make it in that way. So I think you really need to persistent to make your, someone who can stand on your side. And you have to do it systematically from country programming, and project preparation each stage. Yeah, thank you. May take a decade, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Nurullah, would you like to take the question that's on the, well, then now a second one's appeared, but let's just take one.
Okay.
The first one.
Do people know, should I repeat the question or?
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So the question is, will ADB invest in addressing the concern of asset managers of quantifying and converting to monetary value the risk of investing in nature-based solutions? I mean, my response to that would be the space is young, and frankly, the risks are quantifiable only to an extent. We need to make more investments in the space. We need to catalyze blended finance to de-risk investments. I think from a banker's perspective, it's hard to quantify the risk without having examples out there. So right now, it's really about using blended finance to invest in projects, and that would create the case studies that would then help to quantify the risks for asset managers down the line.
And there's a second question, Karen, I don't know if you're online, but we can respond to that offline. I think, Takeshi, you can do that. So I'm being told we are out of time. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry I couldn't ask my colleague Isao to say anything about his TA, but if you do want to find out more about nature-based solutions, Isao is the man. And I hope this was useful, the session. Thank you very much. We enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thanks for this. All right. Well, thanks, everyone, especially the last panel for this wonderful setup for our session, which is also going to be focusing on some of the implementation of nature-based solutions and climate adaptation in Asia and the Caribbean. Okay. This is great. Can I really use this one? Yeah. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 testing. Does this one work? Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll do that so I can manage all this. All right. All right, so I guess I will kick us off with a trip back to Belize. Wait. All right, so this time yesterday, 2 days ago, we talked about the Blue Bond and the Coastal Zone Management Plan. This time I'm going to be talking about how we can address the climate crisis locally with nature-based solution in coastal environment and incorporate those into nationally determined commitment. All right, so as we have all been talking about, climate change is putting the world at risk. Coral reefs are bleaching, mangroves are drowning, and the world has been on fire for the last few years. All of that collectively severely impacting the well-being of people and the future generations to come. So in fall of 2021, COP26 took place in Glasgow, and 120 leaders and citizens representing 197 countries got together to decide and demand climate actions. So one key takeaway from Glasgow was that if there has been some progress, and if fulfilled together, we could increase the likelihood of maintaining global warming below 2 degrees. But that is still quite far from where we should be to reduce impact in some parts of our world. And some, oops, sorry, I'm flying through. Right. And those actions, which we refer to as nationally determined contributions, or NDC, is going to be the topic for what Belize is pioneering. So it's not only climate actions and ambitions are great, but there's a need to think about how do we effectively implement those at the local scale. And through implementation, this is where we can help mitigate climate, foster coastal community adaptation, and eventually long-term resilience. So to do that, we at NatCap tend to use research and engage with local communities and government to help achieve those outcomes more effectively. So over the past 15 years, there has been growing interest in blue carbon solutions, which are another form of nature-based solutions, but focused on coastal ecosystem, including salt marsh, mangroves, and seagrass. We can look at protecting them, restoring them, or enhancing the way we manage them. Provide multiple benefits. From the climate mitigation standpoint, they help store and sequester carbon at a much faster rate than even tropical forests on land. And they also locally provide co-benefits in terms of fisheries, tourism, and coastal protection from climate hazard. So Belize is located in the Caribbean. It's famous for its blue hole, its Mayan temples, and it's also very progressive in planning and sustainable management, like we have talked about in the last couple of days. However, back in the time when we were doing this project in 2020, it came to their attention that blue carbon ecosystems were not included in the NDC, which has been the case for many other countries, because a study has shown that only 17 countries has even incorporated nature-based solution in their NDC, and blue carbon ecosystem were not or barely mentioned at all. So there is a big opportunity here. So together with the government of Belize, WWF, the Pew Charitable Trust, Silvestrum, and NatCap, we came together to tackle two main questions. Oops. The first one was, what are the carbon mitigation and adaptation co-benefits produced by a range of potential blue carbon targets? And when I mention targets, it's how much area should be targeted for nature-based solution, being conservation or restoration. And then where should policies and actions be prioritized to provide a rich combination of the co-benefits that people depend on? Do so, we adopted a participatory science policy process, which helped us co-design and map blue carbon strategies across Belize, as well as quantifying and mapping the co-benefits coming out of those potential nature-based solution, and identify targets that could be then incorporated into the nationally determined contribution of Belize. So through stakeholder engagement, we mapped the opportunity for mangrove conservation and restoration. For the restoration, we looked at historical trends, especially Jess in the back of the room on our team, and looking at where healthy mangroves were located for conservation. And then based on this wide opportunity, because it's often not feasible to finance protection or restoration on 64,000 hectares, we discussed with the government of Belize what could be the potential range of targets that could be incorporated or financed as part of the NDC. So then we quantified the benefits of mangroves, being carbon storage and sequestration through field studies, fisheries, tourism, and coastal risk reduction using our Invest toolbox. So here is a graphic of how we combine our Invest toolbox with the restoration opportunity tool that Jessie is going to be talking about this afternoon. So I'm not going to go into details here. And what this allowed us to do is prioritizing, looking at identifying priority location for each blue carbon strategy and mapping and quantifying the co-benefits for the suite of targets, which you can see on the bottom x-axis. So this is increasing investment in nature-based solution, which as a result increases returns on co-benefits. And what we see is that blue carbon increases as we increase investment, while co-benefits tends to plateau after a certain limit. What we also did is, thanks to our tools, we were able to see that not all areas are equal for or important for investment. It highlighted, we also were able to look at how much of these priority areas were already under protection and maybe would lend themselves well for project for permanence, which finance and supports marine protected areas, and which area fell out of the protected or existing legislation and then would lend themselves well for marine protected area expansion. Ultimately, 2 time-bound targets were included in the Belize revised nationally determined commitment. And so based on those targets, what we want to highlight here is by taking a multi-objective planning approach using ROOT, we were able to look at a suite of preferences. Do we want to maximize coastal protection versus lobster catch or tourism, and actually be able to find a sweet spot that would allow us to maximize the suite of benefits that the coastal communities care about. Based on the targets that Belize selected, we were able to quantify the potential benefits that will come out of it over the long term. And what we highlighted also here is that we see that the peak in benefits doesn't happen everywhere and that there is some spatial variation to be considered, thinking of the equity dimension. So the implication, what came out of this work is that we saw that Belize doubled its commitment to mangrove conservation and along with restoration can help safeguard critical carbon sinks while investing in livelihoods and decreasing exposure to climate risk. By using an optimization approach, we were able to come up with a more efficient pathway to climate resilience, as opposed to taking a single sectorial approach. And this whole case study pioneered an example for other countries who have a lot of blue carbon asset, especially mangroves or seagrass or salt marsh, to emulate this approach to help incorporate those kind of coastal blue carbon nature-based solution into their policy and climate adaptation. This example is also represent a concrete application of a natural capital approach, through co-production of knowledge, we were able to inform and get closer to the goals that the communities have. We were able to quantify trade-offs and synergies, and provide multiple metrics for informing coastal management. And it also provided an opportunity to bring people together that often don't talk to each other. Thank you. Sorry for being over time. So now I'm going to pass it over to Bolong Han, who's going to be talking about, yes, okay, who's going to be talking about the protected areas in China. Bolong is part of the research center for the eco-environmental sciences at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He's also a NatCapper at Stanford. And he is the main author of the Beijing GEP Accounting Technical Guide, and focuses his work and application on natural capital accounting in China, especially in urban area. And if somebody's looking for their phone, because I see it beeping, here it is. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the great opportunity that especially express our new application idea that how to use natural capital accounting in China. And after the presentation of Jed, that we know that there are several different ecosystems and we can account it singly. And in China, we have a method to add them together with a mandatory method that we call it GEP accounting. But according to myself, I want to tell it for the exchange or for marketing. Frankly, I think it's an indicator for governance management. Yeah. Okay. At the very beginning of my presentation, I want to give a review of just 2 weeks ago, we held a meeting that called Mainstreaming Ecosystem Valuation for Green Future at Beijing. This slides want to show that how serious Chinese government, especially local government, take about the GEP and the valuing ecosystem, valuing natural capital. The most powerful central government's department related to natural capital management all involved and gave welcome speech in this conference. And at least 5 deputy mayors from different cities, including Beijing, gave a speech in this conference. And also we have NatCappers from Stanford University, such as Professor Stephen Pulaski, gave a keynote speech to tell people how we can calculate natural capital and how we can use natural capital correctly. And the story began almost 10 years ago. Professor Ouyang, which is my boss, my PI of my research group, have this idea of GEP that we can calculate all the ecosystem services value together. Because different ecosystem services have its different unit, such as you have ton of carbon sequestration, ton for water conservation. But how can we add them together? Even its unit is weight, we can't just simply add them together. So monitoring them, give them currency unit is more easily for people, especially citizens to understand this concept. So that's the main idea of GEP. And in the past decade, China tried lots of ways to use natural capital accounting, especially GEP. 10 years ago, we used GEP concept to examine the ecological protection performance, that how much natural capital services are gained from this, we call it ecological protection area. And recently, cases from Zhejiang province, they use the GEP for pricing the loss of ecosystem service, and for they want money from private sectors if they destroy our nature space, and use the GEP concept and the result for planning urban protection area. Yeah. At the March of 2022, we have a national guide for how to calculate GEP accounting. This book have more than 200 pages full of mathematics. But the most important part is at the very beginning. We call it the chapter 1 principle. In the principle part, it was right that the GEP of administrative unit is for examination of government performance and equal compensation distribution. What this sentence mean? It actually created a scarcity from the, we call it the executive orders, that every local citizens need to calculate GEP to test, to examine their governance ability. And it's interesting that, we have a GEP book, which was getting the economic book list for high quality. It's not in the ecological research list, but economic research. And the basement of ecosystem accounting is, we call it 3+1 systems, which was first built at Shenzhen. Shenzhen is the most urbanized area, cities in China, which is neighbor with Hong Kong. And the system include three basic support. The first is technical guidance. Second is a statistical mechanism. And the third is software platform. And that's the local guideline for how to calculate GEP and its indicators. And this is the statistical mechanism, which involved more than 20 different official departments, ask them to submit their data for GEP accounting. And this is the platform. Because of the time, I won't show the video. Yeah. And the platform, the software is already installed for more than 30 different local governments on the organization to get a good application for accounting among China. And the first application aspect is monitoring GEP for its compensation and examination, which is the main original purpose of this work. And you can see from these pictures, this shows the changes of GEP of Shenzhen, the city. And also GEP is not just a number, but a map. We mapping its regulation services and its culture services as well. And in Beijing, one sub-district of Beijing named Yanqing, last year they gave more than 50 million RMB to distribute those money to their sub-administrative unit, which is towns and communities, to distribute those monies based on GEP index. Okay. And the second aspect of application is for mapping, forecasting GEP for ecosystem loss control. This case is still from Beijing, another district, Mintogo district. They have a big tourism project. In this plan, according to their original version of plan, they will cause regulation services decreasing more than 60%. And after they forecasting the GEP change, they modified their plan. And according to their new plan, it will keep their regulation service and cause an increasing of regulation services. And this is cases from Zhejiang. The Zhejiang case makes exchange of GEP's regulation services value. The story is there is a private school will be built in this city, and it will cost more than 1,000 RMB losing of regulation services per year. And the developer gave 200,000 RMB one time to compensation this lost. These numbers maybe have a great gap, but we thought the 200,000 RMB was given to repair its eco sites, which can produce such an amount of ecosystem product or ecosystem services. That's why the number is different. And another application of GEP is mapping GEP for protection and development. For Shenzhen, we use GEP, the results, more than 10 different maps to overlapping them to identify the high-level eco-protection zone area to zoning area. And in this protection area, more than half of the cities, the land area was involved. And this area gave more than almost 90% of its total GEP. And still we have zoning this area. We have zoning this area for development area. We choose those areas which have less GEP. So if you make development in this area, you will cause less loss of the regulation services. And there's a case from Beijing, Mintogo district, overlapping different ecosystem services together. You can identify the main function, main developing direction of different villages. You give different villages their main eco-industry, such as in some villages, you can main focus on eco-production. You can earn by eco-compensation. And some other villages, you can work on agriculture. And for the last aspect of application GEP is for investment of nature. Shenzhen is famous for its Sponge City project. Sponge City is built MBS for flood mitigation, runoff retention. And every year, the government invests a lot of money in these sponge cities. They want us to answer how much social benefit we can get back from these sponge cities. Then they use GEP accounting. That for its roadside green space, I want to raise the dedicated numbers. And for its green roofs, we also calculate out how much social benefit you can get every year from those sponge city projects. And the last, which is the coming soon cases, which also have the support from ADB, that we calculate the GEP for South Dongting Lake, which is important global important wetland areas. We calculate the GEP, current GEP, and we will calculate its GEP for the future to make a comparison that tell local government, if you make a conservation in this area, how much will increase according to its GEP, its social benefit, whether this is a good investment on this conservation. Yeah, that's all the cases I bring here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And now we will pass it over to Lisa, who will talk about her Myanmar natural capital work.
Thanks, Jade. So it's always a little intimidating and humbling to come after a presentation on China because the scope and the pace of what is been happening there is always so impressive. And I think this presentation on work from Myanmar is an example of how natural capital assessments are possible and useful even in maybe more data scarce contexts. And I'll also add that the work that I'm showing is from 2015 primarily, so in a very different political context than today. And so I have a very short amount of time, so to keep things to that, I would consider this more of a teaser. I'll highlight 2 examples of work that we did in Myanmar, and I'm happy to follow up with anybody who is interested in getting into more of the detail. And so the first example I'll highlight is a national natural capital assessment that we did in partnership with WWF and then the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in Myanmar. And so this was a national level assessment. It highlighted the places where Myanmar's natural capital provided the greatest ecosystem service benefits for a select set of services, and highlighted how maintenance of these benefits depends then on avoiding impacts to critical ecosystems from infrastructure or other development activities that were being planned. And it was intended to support Myanmar in its movement on a path of more sustainable, inclusive development. And this natural capital assessment allowed us to link information on nature and people at the national scale. So for one example, we used the INVEST sediment retention model to highlight where are ecosystems nationally retaining the greatest amounts of sediment, and then link that with information from Myanmar's national census on households that rely on surface water for drinking water, to illustrate then where forests and other natural ecosystems are most important for purifying water for downstream populations. So this is an example. We didn't get into monetary value or economic value, but could highlight key areas at the national level. So again, this is the key areas for securing clean drinking water for people who rely on surface water. We also looked you can use the same information at a project level. So looking at dams and reservoirs in Myanmar and where were key areas within those upstream watersheds that were important for keeping sediment out of those dams. And also again, nationally looking at coastal ecosystems and where those were most critical for protecting people living along the coasts in Myanmar, which is one, I guess, I don't know where it compares to the Philippines these days in terms of risk from climate change and natural disasters, but that was a critical issue and continues to be a critical issue in Myanmar. And I'll say this information, this national natural capital assessment then supported the government in its green growth planning and other national development planning, and also sparked some new policies that at the time were intended to mainstream this kinds of approaches. Then taking a step in the second example and going to more of a project level, we also conducted a natural capital assessment in support of infrastructure planning. And this was work focused on a proposed road link from Thailand. You can see it highlighted in the yellow circles, from Thailand to a planned deep sea port and other economic zone on the coast in Myanmar. And I could give a whole presentation about the context there, so I won't get into the details, but it was a really interesting location to be working. And this is an image here. The proposed road would basically upgrade an existing dirt road that is right along a river and in a very mountainous area. And this also happens to be one of the last intact forest areas in the region, connecting important habitat between Thailand and of charismatic and endangered species. So one dimension of this work was to look not only to think about the ways that this proposed road would impact the area and communities and biodiversity, but also the ways that the road depends on natural capital and ecosystem services. And one aspect of that is through bridges, and bridges are at risk for damage and even collapse from bridge scour. So if large amounts of sediment wash down the river, it damages the bridge infrastructure. And sediment, as my colleague Rafa always reminds us, is a natural part of rivers, but also can be greatly affected by deforestation, illegal mining in this case, and a variety of upstream activities. So again, we looked at where sources of sediment would be increased most if there was land use change around the road, and in particular, where those increases in sediment would have impact for the bridges on the road. And you can see one of those areas is actually quite close to the road and likely to be affected by road development as well. So there's some feedbacks there. And then this information supported regional land use planning as well as an environmental impact assessment process at the time. So addressing both the kind of safeguard side and the broader planning and upstreaming that I think many of us think is so important to really getting these values embedded in decision making. I think this approach was also very helpful in bringing the project developer to the table and thinking about all the different players who had a stake in the landscapes around the road. And I'll just wrap up by saying we also produced some guidance on the links between natural capital and roads. This was work with the Inter-American Development Bank. So the examples here are primarily from Latin America and the Caribbean, but I think the lessons have a lot of relevance broadly as well. So I think to the question from the woman from AIIB, there are examples of ways that natural capital approaches can be brought into infrastructure projects that don't use that as a starting point. And it's available online. I'm happy to share with folks as well. So I will wrap up there, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And now passing it over to Rafa, who's going to talk about natural hazards in Asia.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everybody for setting up the session. Probably I should start this presentation with like a few short qualifiers. Firstly, indeed, always humbling to speak after Bao Long and Jade and Lisa, and like their great kind of like research to impact kind of case studies. For this presentation, I was basically asked to give a little bit more of an insight into how we think at the Natural Capital Project about kind of like new research frontiers in terms of like modeling ecosystem services, modeling new types of ecosystem services and thinking about ways of how to evaluate them. And here specifically thinking about natural hazards. And I think this is a very timely topic. I think it's a topic that really stands at the center of the debate of like, or like discussions about like climate adaptation and climate resilience. Sanath brought it up in his presentations, for example, thinking about like floods and landslides and similar natural disasters. It's really critical and a core value that nature provides to societies. And the second qualifier, similar to what Lisa said, this is really just a very quick teaser, and I'm going to flip through this pretty rapidly. If you're interested in these topics, I think that there are opportunities to implement similar approaches in whatever geography or domain you're working, then please find me after the session during the break. And so today I am going to talk about, really like two kind of like different domains. First, a little bit more in detail about like landslide risks, livelihoods, and renewable energy and their nexus in Nepal, and then really going very, very high level over two emerging topics that we're working on related to both flood risk and resilient river deltas across Asia. Firstly, talking about landslides, sediment, and renewable energy in Nepal. As our colleagues from South Asia are certainly aware, the Nepal and the Himalayas in general hold probably the world's greatest untapped hydropower potential. This hydropower potential shows up very prominently in many clean climate action plans. However, the rivers of the Himalayas are also some of the places on this planet where we have the highest sediment loads. There is a great connection, a very important connection between sediment and hydropower, in the sense that excess sediment increases operation and maintenance for hydropower facilities, damages turbines, leads to loss of reservoir space, and therefore reduces the benefits that this renewable energy infrastructure can provide for climate action. Sediment in the rivers of Nepal and throughout the Himalayas also very strongly affected by human interventions across scales. Climate change leads to melting glaciers, which mobilizes huge amount of excess sediments, but it's also unsustainable local development, for instance, the building of roads and the abandonment of traditional agricultural practices that leads to increases in sediment loads throughout the rivers of the Himalayas. And so together with the World Bank, we embarked on a research project to identify where and through which processes sediment is generated upstream of dams in both Nepal and Pakistan, and trying to design investment portfolios that lead to tangible benefits, cost-effective interventions for downstream hydropower projects and dams. In order to do so, and after talking with like many stakeholders, it emerged that for several of our case study projects, landslides are absolutely critical as part of the sediment budget of basins, river basins in the Himalayas. And as we didn't really have a model available that could capture landslides within the INVEST toolbox, we developed a new approach to study and model landslide risk under different climate and land use change scenarios across scales. So what I mean with that, so we both have this kind of like landscape level assessment. What you see here on the left on this map, basically where darker brown areas indicate places where landslides are most relevant in order to generate sediment, and therefore also places where implementing nature-based solutions, such as, for instance, like planting native grasses or restoring natural forests, could lead to a greatest reduction in landslides, and therefore then also in terms of like reductions of sediment loads for downstream hydropower plants. The model, as I mentioned, kind of like works across scales, so we can then also zoom in into the results of our modeling framework and look in a much more granular way about how landslides impact lives and livelihoods by overlaying, for instance, the pathways that landslides take, and trying to identify where those landslides would impact specific road segments, or where they would even put risk at danger, would put lives and livelihoods at danger because they intersect with like settlements, schools and hospitals and other infrastructure. And we used this framework to study a number of different investment portfolios, again, looking at like different levels of investment ranging from $500,000 to $15 million, and trying to understand what are the returns on investment across sectors, which you see here in these different colors, looking at benefits from for downstream hydropower, but also looking at benefits for preserving lives, and eventually also looking at benefits to carbon sequestration and local agriculture. And what I think is really interesting here is like what I would like to highlight here, like two things. Firstly, we found that many of these investment portfolios that we optimized using our modeling tools yield actually a positive return on investment. So preventing landslides throughout the landscapes of the Himalayas leads to a positive return on investment. However, which sectors create most of that return depends a lot on your investment portfolio. So for instance, if you have only a very small amount of money to invest, then our tools would allow you to invest that in a way where in a way that like minimizes landslide impacts on most exposed villages. So preventing loss of life, which is very costly and of course also tragic. And if there's like a bigger amount of money available, then there's the opportunity to invest across landscapes and create major benefits for instance, for agriculture, and also to influence the basin sediment budget in a way that leads to tangible benefits for downstream hydropower. And with that, I'd like to come to kind of like two emerging topics where we are kind of like still, you know, like working on this kind of like valuation and kind of like impact pipeline. The first one that's really, thank you, really close to my heart, that's something that I've worked a lot on, is, you know, thinking about coastal resilience and resilient river deltas. I think that's in a way like very well aligned with the setting of this conference, given that Metro Manila is one of the most rapidly subsiding areas on this planet, which puts it at great risk for sea level rise and so on. And we've been working in that realm a lot on the example of the Mekong Delta, which is rapidly subsiding. And where indeed, as Lisa highlighted before, you know, often when we talk about ecosystem services, we frame sediment basically as a problem. You know, we have excess sediment, so to say, sediment pollution. But for coastal areas, for river deltas, it's really important to maintain their natural sediment delivery from the upstream river basins, which in a way is like the most effective way, the most effective nature-based solution to fight coastal land loss and subsidence. And if we want to think about sediment that's being delivered from river basins to river deltas, we really have to take this kind of like large-scale perspective that includes the entire upstream basin, but that also thinks across sectors. For instance, across the hydropower sector, which reduces sediment loads, across construction, which mines huge amount of sand from coastal areas for building, for making concrete, for reclaiming land, where it's like a great challenge to, you know, thinking about how can we really highlight these diverse contributions of rivers to coastal resilience and mainstream them into kind of like bankable projects. And you know, then the second part on which I would like to touch very briefly, because I think it's timely and it's also a case study that has come up a number of times in this conference, thinking about flood disasters and particularly about this like great disaster that has struck Pakistan in 2022. Just wanting to put out there that we at the Natural Capital Project are also working in this space, trying to understand through remote sensing and like leveraging global data to understand where there are different opportunities for climate adaptation in Pakistan's floodplains, because these floods that we've observed in those floodplains in 2022 are unfortunately the new normal. And we need to think about which options there are for large-scale climate adaptation in order to make sure that the lives and livelihoods of the people living there are protected in the future. And with that, I'd like to wrap it up. Thank you very much.
So I know we're at time. Do we want to take a couple of questions or all right? Sounds good. Any questions in the room or online?
We have online questions.
Yes. So this question, I think is for Bowen. Does China BRI help on Myanmar project in terms of road development? According to the plans, it builds on railroad connecting South China to Myanmar.
I can speak to the road that in the Dawei Road was not, at least at that time, funded by China. It was, I think, with funding from Thailand and maybe also Japan. But I don't know about roads in Myanmar more generally.
Even I don't know the BRI project, especially this may be a small project compared to the BRI strategy. So sorry, I don't know the details.
Sorry. Hi, again, Jackie from EIB. I have a question to Ms. Dr. Han. Sorry, it's my first time hearing about DEP, even though the headquarters of CAS and EIB is very close. But I want to ask the transferability of the study of the DEP calculation. I understand now it's only implemented in certain province. I want to know the prerequisite of this study to be replicated in other province or in other regions of the world. And another question to Lisa and Raphael is also the transparent. What's the prerequisite if you want to replicate the study that you have showcased? And that's all.
Yeah, thanks for the question about the transparency and accuracy. Actually, I think the transparency is it's very transparent because the guidebook is already published. Everyone, even the commercial consulting companies, can do the accounting job for local government. But frankly, to say that the result may be different. The different is not based on the transparency of the method, but the data. The different researchers, even my colleagues, if we use different data results, we may have different results. And technically, because the GEP accounting have a lot of data of GIS data, if you are familiar with this area, we know there is a scaling problem with GIS data. If we use a high resolution data, it may cause a different result compared to a low resolution data. So for my cases in urban areas, research and accounting is based on high resolution. Because those high resolution data can reflect the small green space, which urban area is hard to build huge green space in the future, but the mayors are work hard to build we call it a small pocket green park for citizens, things like that. So I don't think there is a problem with transparency. The second is about the accuracy. And actually, I think the accuracy is mainly about the data resource and the standard of the data. It's true that right now we don't have the data standard for GP accounting. So that's our next phase of work, that we will set more data standards. And but I think the data standard is not focused on a more accurate result, but for a more equal result. If we make a comparing between different provinces or comparing with myself from yesterday. So that's the main purpose of the data standard. Yeah, thanks.
I can quickly from the national assessment and then the assessment around the road using INVEST. The INVEST models are quite transferable. And in many places, they're also flexible in terms of the data. So there's a lot of information, a lot of global data sources that can be used, especially if you're thinking about broad scales, not so much maybe in the urban areas that Bao Long was mentioning, and then can be supplemented with local data where it's available. And I think those kind of coarse approaches or approaches with global data can be really useful and can be done quite quickly as a first pass, and are often good at identifying where are the most critical areas, and where then is it worth investing in maybe more detailed local data depending on the decision context. And then in other places, if you have data to calibrate those models, then you can be more confident about the precision in terms of tons of sediment retained rather than just high or low. I think another area where local data is really most valuable too is on the social and economic side. We're not, some stuff can be sensed from satellites and some stuff, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, well, just probably to add to that, like very briefly, as I mentioned, like lots of these kind of like, pushing research frontiers in like new domains of ecosystem services driven by like a specific demand, let's say, working on the floods in Pakistan or like these like landslide hazards in the Himalayas. But I think for whatever research we do, it's really basically by design that we try to design the methods that we develop and that might eventually be turned into investment models in a way that they work in settings with like limited data availability, so often built in a way to integrate or to be parameterized, to be able to be parameterized using global data sets and so on. So I think really most of our approaches can be applied worldwide, and probably small add-on to what like Lisa said, I think there's often this notion that there is a trade-off between kind of the quality of model results and the scale. However, now in the age of like big data and like satellite data, we actually find that often these global data sets that have many advantages are actually not at all inferior to more local data sets, which very often might be outdated or like hampered by data quality problems, whereas many of these global data sets, are just more curated. Not saying, like local data are essential in many ways, but there's really a great deal of ecosystem services that we can evaluate very well using these like globally available data sources.
Well, on those words of wisdom, I think we can break for lunch.
Was that answer?
Oh, quick reply to a question online. Sumit Pokhrel being interested in understanding the landslide model in more detail. For those interested in these approaches, I'd like to point you to the report that we published together with the World Bank Group, which you can find looking for watershed management in the Kandaki Basin, which has all the details.
Oh, looks like we have another question at the back.
Thank you. GEP, so you are at the pilot stage. Is there any, plan for, upscaling or full-fledged provincial level or national level accounting introduction?
I don't know whether this information should be released here because we have a close cooperation with the National Statistics Bureau, which is set and take charge of the GDP accounting. Right now, they are concerned about the GDP accounting. And in the future 2 or 3 years, I don't think we will have an official release of China's GDP. But since we are research centers, we can do more research. Even we have a cooperation with Natural Capital Project from Stanford City, we will calculate a GDP for the global, for the world. I think it's still stayed at the research level, not official level. But definitely, since the government in China take serious of the GDP, I think more work will be pushing this. As I introduced, according to my personal idea, I think the accuracy is not the problem. The accuracy will always be more accurate because we have new data results, because we may have new models, even replace the current guideline. The more important thing is the concept and the idea, the governor and the decision makers know that ecosystem service and the natural has its values to give benefit, and those benefits can transform into money, can be used for compensation to buy, or we go for it to buy the public service from nature. I think that's the most important and which will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. I think more provincial cases will show in the maybe next time when we meet each other. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think it's a great example because money flows and you're changing the flow of money. If just accounting itself, it doesn't actually sustain. Like lots of eco compensation examples, it doesn't hold. But you have a political will and you have a one-party system which can really, so that's the big difference. And yeah, I think it's great if you can show it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, I'm getting the note here that it's time to break. You can continue this conversation over lunch, and then we'll regroup this afternoon to take a deeper dive into our invest and root toolbox if you want to hear more about how you can conduct those assessments to elevate nature-based solution into infrastructure planning or climate adaptation, change the face of this world, and save people. Thank you.